Hey SAT students, this is Guy from penguinprep.com. In this video, you'll learn how to distinguish between leveling and non-essential clause problems. Let's begin. The SAT won't tell you whether to use a leveling or non-essential clause strategy. You have to be the one to figure that out. And that's what this video is going to teach you. If the problem has a non-essential clause and if the non-essential clause is right next to the blank, then you need to use the non-essential clause strategy. Now, if the problem doesn't have a non-essential clause, or if the non-essential clause is not next to the blank, then you need to use the leveling strategy. For example, try reading this sentence. The Voyager 1 probe launched by NASA in 1977 became the first human-made object to enter interstellar space when it crossed the heliopause in 2012. Here, the non-essential clause is launched by NASA in 1977. And since this non-essential clause is directly next to the blank, we need to use the non-essential clause strategy to solve this problem. Now read this sentence. Aviator Bessie Coleman could not obtain a pilot's license in the United States because of a race, so she traveled to France. She earned her license there in 1921 and became an international sensation. This sentence does not have a non-essential clause, so you have to use the leveling strategy. Pretty simple, right? Now pause the video and try and determine whether to use the leveling or non-essential clause strategy for this problem. This problem has a non-essential clause, working with the spectrograph her colleague Ken Ford had built. But the blank is not next to this non-essential clause, so in fact, this is a leveling problem. So again, if the problem contains a non-essential clause that's right next to the blank, then use the non-essential clause strategy, but otherwise, use the leveling strategy. Let's practice with some problems now. We see that there's a non-essential clause from which to point. Now, there's a blank directly next to it, so this is indeed a non-essential clause problem. Since the non-essential clause ends with a comma, we need to make it begin with a comma as well. That makes answer choice D the correct option. This problem doesn't have a non-essential clause, so you need to use the leveling strategy. The first piece is an independent clause because the main subject is the novelist CA and the verb which the subject is actively doing is wrote. The second piece is also an independent clause because the subject is the work and the verb is has since been. Now, since we have two independent clauses, the sum of the levels is 1 plus 1 equals to 2. We need the level 2 punctuation, so the correct answer has to be B. This problem has a non-essential clause, perched just above the bristles, but this non-essential clause is not directly next to the blank. Furthermore, we don't see any other non-essential clauses that are next to this blank, so we can say this is a leveling problem. The first piece is independent because the subject is botanist studying the dandelion and the verb is have discovered. The second piece is also independent because the subject is this vortex and the verb is quadruples. Since we have two independent clauses, we need a 1 plus 1 equals 2 a level 2 punctuation. Now going through the options, the two choices that could be correct are C and D. A semicolon and a comma plus fanboys are both level 2 punctuations. When we're left with more than one correct answer like this, we need to plug in the choices and determine whether they make sense in context. If you plug in a semicolon is pretty neutral, so it could work. When you plug in comma so though, you're indicating that there is a cause and effect relationship between the first and the second clause. Is that true? Is it because the botanist studied the dandelion that the vortex quadruples the time that the seeds drift in the air? No, there's no cause and effect relationship like that. Therefore, D is not right and the correct answer is C. There are two non-essential clauses in this problem. The first is from the French to increasingly playful, and the second is from acclaim to decades. Now, the second non-essential clause is not directly next to the blank, so it is not relevant to solving this problem. But the first one is next to the blank, so this problem needs to be solved using a non-essential clause strategy. Now, the non-essential clause begins from the French and ends at increasingly playful, and it begins with a comma, so it must end with a comma. So the correct answer is A. There is a non-essential clause in this problem, from who to depression, but there's no non-essential clause that's next to the blank, so this problem is a leveling problem. Now the first piece is an independent clause because the subject is the sculptor Augusta Savage and the verb is created. The second piece is also an independent clause because it is composed of two small pieces, from because to it and from the to closed. Since the first piece is a non and the second is an independent clause and they're linked together by a comma, we can consider the whole second piece to be an independent clause. Now since we have two pieces that are independent, we need 1 + 1 equals to a level 2 punctuation. Going through the options, the only thing that supplies that is answer choice B. There's no non-essential clause here, so this is a leveling problem. The first piece is a non because of the subordinating conjunction after. The second piece is an independent clause because the main subject is the journalist Ida B. Wells and the verb is relocated. So there's a non and an independent clause, which means that we need a level 0 + 1 equals to a level 1 punctuation. Now going through the options, the only option that supplies the level 1 is B, so B is the correct answer. This problem is quite tricky. There's a non-essential clause from conducting to New York, but it's not next to a blank, so we don't really care about it. Now, there's no other non-essential clause that is next to the blank, so this is a leveling problem. The first piece is from after to social context, and it's a non because of the subordinating conjunction after. And the second piece is an independent clause because it has the main subject, the field of sociolinguists, and the verb gained. So we are looking for a 0 + 1 equals to a level 1 punctuation. Going through the options, B supplies that, so it is the correct answer. I'm not sure if you noticed, but this is a nested non-essential clause problem. The outer non-essential clause is from an iterant to address the gathering. The inner non-essential clause is from born to Dutch. Now the outer non-essential clause is directly next to the blank, so this is a non-essential clause problem. Now the outer non-essential clause begins with a dash, and if you remember from the previous videos, it must also end with a dash in this case. So the correct answer is B. Great job. I hope this helped you to distinguish between leveling and non-essential clause problems. As always, practice problems are on pingpret.com, link in the description below, and the next video will be on adverbs. I'll see you then.